After its golden generation of generals defeated Carthage, the victorious Roman Republic was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. However, beset by innumerable contradictions, it began disintegrating from the inside as the 1st century BC began. During this tumultuous time, many political figures attempted to take power, among whom was a man who, through desperation, cunning, and martial prowess, became perhaps the most powerful man in Roman history. In this new series on the history of the Roman Republic, we will cover the life and times of Rome's anti-Caesar, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, champion of the Optimates, bane of the Populares, and the first Roman general ever to march an army on the Eternal City. In 138 BC, only 8 years after Carthage's final destruction, the protagonist of our story, Sulla, was born in Rome into a branch of the prestigious Cornelii gens. On the surface, his heritage would have guaranteed a privileged life, but unfortunately for Sulla, this wasn't the case. In contrast to many of the more fortunate Cornelii family lines, such as that of the Scipios, Sulla's offshoot was relatively destitute. At the time, none of his clan had risen above the rank of praetor for several generations. According to one tale which has come down to us, Sulla's wet nurse was carrying her young ward through the streets of Rome one day when she was approached by a mysterious woman. Upon seeing the child, the enigmatic figure spoke the words, "Pua tibi et republicae tue felix, the infant will be a source of felicity to you and the state." However, such predictions seemed far removed from Sulla's experiences as he grew into a young man, and by the time he came of age, his father died, leaving Sulla nothing, and reducing him to inhabiting the same house as a slave. Lacking money and access to high society, Sulla, blessed with a mane of golden red hair and blue eyes, found friends among the vagrants of Roman society, actors, something that only decreased his standing in the eyes of the aristocrats. It was a stroke of pure luck that changed Sulla's fate. In a short period of time, both the youngster's mistress Nicopolis and his stepmother passed away, leaving him a substantial sum of money. Now a man of means, Sulla was duly elected quaestor for 107 BC, being assigned to the staff of consul Gaius Marius. Ongoing since 111 BC, the so-called Jugurthine War was Rome's desert Vietnam, exposing the absolute worst of Roman politics and the weaknesses of its military. Numidian ruler Jugurtha was avoiding retribution by bribing senators and assassinating rivals, while the legions were repeatedly ambushed by his guerrilla warriors familiar with the rugged terrain of the Maghreb. To rectify this situation, Marius launched an expedition into Africa, personally leading the main force, but leaving his deputy Sulla behind in Italy with the crucial task of assembling a large cavalry force. Evidently, the greenhorn quaestor succeeded, and brought a force of riders to Marius in the spring of 106 BC. Sulla turned on his notorious charm immediately upon arrival, making soldiers, officers, and even Marius admire him. And as the war went on, the Romans eventually captured a fort near the river Meluccia, where most of Jugurtha's treasury was stored, only to be informed that Jugurtha had captured Cirta in their rear. Marching back, the Romans confronted and managed to convincingly beat the king and his allies. In this victory, Sulla emerged as the star of the show. First to engage, he hit the enemy flank at a crucial moment, routing the entire enemy army and capturing Cirta. This victory made Jugurtha's allies, crucially his father-in-law, Bocchus I of Numidia, waver, so Marius sent Sulla to negotiate. The latter swiftly weaved his way into Bocchus's good graces, reassuring and instructing him as though he was a close counselor rather than an enemy ambassador. Real or manufactured, this diplomatic friendship allowed Sulla to end the war. Meeting in the middle of the desert, Bocchus promised both Sulla and Jugurtha that he would hand the other over, allowing the Mauritanian king to lean whichever way he wanted to. Lured by Sulla's promise of favourable terms, Jugurtha arrived for negotiations unarmed and was immediately seized by men jumping out of hiding. He was shackled and handed over to Sulla, who then gave him to Marius, whose jealousy at the plaudits earned by his subordinate triggered an enmity that lasted a lifetime. With the war in Africa concluded, the Marian army was called back to Italy to fight an invasion of Germanic tribes in the Cimbrian War. Sulla wasted no time in employing his well-renowned magnetism to split the Germanic Marsi tribe off from their kin and persuade them to become allies of Rome, a great diplomatic boon to the cause. Realizing Marius's shadow would always veil his achievements, Sulla went to serve Rome's other consul, Catulus, in the hopes that military acclaim of his own would quicken his ascent. In 101 BC, Sulla remedied a supply shortage among Catulus's troops so effectively that not only was he able to feed Catulus's armies, but Marius's soldiers as well, causing Marius's jealousy to flare up once again. Thanks to Marius's politically motivated deployment, Sulla was relegated to a relatively minor role in the final Roman victory of the Cimbrian War at Vercellae. After this, Sulla returned to Rome, and his political career began in earnest. 98 BC, however, saw the ambitious noble fail to gain the praetorship due to basing his campaign on his military achievements as a junior officer. Sulla learned his lesson and won next year through bribes and cynically telling voters what they wanted to hear. As urban praetor, he had a century's worth of exotic lions sent from his royal contact Bocchus for display at the Apollonian Games, gaining immense popularity, which only further inflamed Marius's ire. According to the sources, Sulla's term ended hastily when he was sent to deal with the pirate-infested province of Cilicia as propraetor. However, the pirate issue soon took a back seat to the larger struggle that was taking shape in Asia Minor between Rome and the Kingdom of Pontus, led by Mithridates VI. Since 114 BC, Mithridates had expanded Pontic rule across Anatolia, and in doing so, attracted the wary gaze of the Roman Republic. By the time Sulla arrived to take up his magistracy in 96, Mithridates had managed to drive out or slay 2 Cappadocian kings. Installed in their place was a son of the Pontic king, and when the Romans ordered that puppet to get out, Mithridates appointed an apparently rogue regent known as Gordius, who was almost certainly still acting in the king's name. Almost instantly after the propraetor arrived, he received orders to take his meager forces and kick the Mithridatic stooge out of Cappadocia for good. Despite possessing inadequate forces for the job, Sulla took his small army, reinforced it with allies from the cities of Asia Minor, and embarked on a campaign. It is one of history's great disappointments that we have little detail concerning what was almost certainly one of Sulla's greatest military achievements. However, what we do know is that by using a combination of military skill and diplomatic trickery in the rough Cappadocian land, the propraetor threw Gordius out with his motley force and put the previously deposed king, Ariobarzanes, back on his throne. In the aftermath, Sulla was not only declared imperator by his men, but reached the Euphrates River and received the first ever embassy from the rising Parthian Empire to the rising Roman one. Again, the propraetor asserted his and his republic's superiority in the typical tactless Roman style. He brought 3 chairs to the meeting, seating himself in the center, whilst both the Cappadocian and Parthian emissaries were forced to the left and right. This meeting was ultimately successful for Sulla in a diplomatic sense, resulting in a treaty of friendship between the 2 great powers, but he'd also asserted Rome's symbolic authority. Rome sat at the center of affairs, directing the trifling Parthians as easily as it controlled the kinglet of Cappadocia. When the Parthian king learned of the insult, his diplomat was executed for allowing it. Nothing further of note happened for the remainder of Sulla's time as governor, and even the amount of time itself isn't known for certain. But by 93 BC, his assignment was over, and he was making his way back to Rome. Now his career as a great man could begin in earnest. Just as the rising starlet was about to take the next step in his career, however, the tribune Livilius Drusus, initially supported by Sulla due to his desire for a strong senate, was assassinated in 91 for backing citizenship for Rome's Italian allies. With that murder, the Republic descended into a self-inflicted civil war of terrible scale, the Social War, and the rising Sulla was called upon to fight in the ensuing conflict alongside his hardline political rivals, such as the populare darling Marius. As Romans and their former comrades in arms fought and slew one another on 2 different fronts, Sulla gradually became a hero. Although he began the war acting as legate to one of the consuls, he swiftly rose to command an army of his own and drove it deep into rebel territory, besieging Pompeii in 89 BC. When a disgruntled force under the command of another legate slew their arrogant commander, Sulla acted decisively to resolve the situation. Countermanding the wishes of some officers who wished to have the mutineers viciously punished, Sulla recognized the need to keep solidarity during the war, and particularly the siege at Pompeii. Instead of acting draconian, Sulla took advantage of the inevitable remorse felt by the soldiery, simply informing him that he expected reparations in the form of greater courage and doggedness during their coming battles. When an enemy commander, known as Cluentius, came to Pompey's aid with an army, Sulla managed to rout the rebels in a hard-fought clash, taking the besieged town as prize not long after. Stabiae and Eclanum fell in quick succession, followed by the entire Herpini nation. With dash and ability, the legate then turned and unexpectedly invaded northern Samnium, routing the Samnite army and eventually capturing the rebel capital at Bovianum. Unlike his exploits against the Germans, this laundry list of military triumphs closer to home skyrocketed Sulla to the apex of Roman society. Still shimmering with the freshly won glory of his victories, the once destitute friend of actors put himself forward for the consulship, and won by an absolute landslide, swept into office by a grateful and awestruck populace. 88 BC was to be his year, during which Sulla would carve his name into history. He would eventually do just that, but in a manner far distinct from what he expected. The new consul wed his son to the daughter of his colleague and political ally Quintus Pompeius Rufus. Not satisfied with just one marriage alliance, Sulla himself controversially married a scion of the ancient and powerful Metelli family. Secure in his friendships, the prime consul would proceed in conducting state business and acquiring the year's true prize, supreme command in a full-scale war against Mithridates VI. Previously seen as only a minor annoyance, the shrewd king of Pontus had taken advantage of Rome's civil strife-induced paralysis to expand without consequence. When the enfeebled Romans sent Manius Aquilius to threaten Mithridates into submission, he was instead defeated, captured, and executed by having molten gold poured down his throat. By the time Sulla took up his consulship, this incoming eastern command, and its sure promise of dignitas aplenty, was the talk of the town. Motivated by this desire for wealth and greatness, the Republic's grandees would tear each other and Rome apart to get it, particularly Sulla and his old mentor, the aging Gaius Marius. Boundlessly envious of the rising sun that was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, the setting sun of Marius found common cause with a radical tribune of 88 BC known as Sulpicius. Previously a sullen ally, Sulpicius had found the consul unwilling to implement his legislation, and so went to Marius in hopes of using the man's great name as a weapon. In return for Marius's help, though, the aging general required Sulpicius use his power as tribune to transfer the Mithridatic command and all its accompanying boons to him. When Sulla, as of yet unaware of the plan to deprive him, responded by declaring a suspension of public business in order to give himself time to speak with the people, Sulpicius initiated a bout of rioting throughout the city. Blindsided by bitter factional violence, which left his co-consul's son dead on the streets of Rome, Sulla was forced to take refuge with his loyal army, who were in the process of stamping out the social war's last embers. Taking advantage of Sulla's absence, Sulpicius went on a legislative rampage, implementing a number of measures which included fully enfranchising the Italian allies. Then, running hot with success, the tribune snatched the Mithridatic command away from Sulla and handed it to Marius. When Sulla found out about this sleight of hand, he was utterly furious, realizing he had been backed into a corner and threatened with humiliation and political death. So Sulla did the unthinkable. He incited his rank-and-file legionaries with complaints of the Marians' behavior, implying that the old general would strip them of the opportunity for Pontic plunder. The soldiery was so dead-set loyal to their magnetic commander that when Marius sent military tribunes to seize the army, they were promptly stoned to death. However, upon realizing that Sulla was intending an unprecedented march on Rome, most of his officers deserted. Nevertheless, the consul was confident and desperate, and so continued his fateful advance on the barely defended capital with 6 full legions. When panicked senatorial emissaries came to ask the general why he was moving on his own city, Sulla simply replied that he planned to free it from tyrants. To his view anyway, the consul did just that. When the army finally arrived, it fought a vicious urban battle against a hastily organized Marian force, and when Sulla personally intervened, managed to set Marius and his allies to flight. Marius, for his part, managed to escape the clutches of his rival and went into exile all the way to Africa. Sulpicius, however, wasn't so lucky. Betrayed by a slave and discovered by sullen troops in a villa near Rome, the tribune was executed, his head sent to the consul, and all his laws annulled. However, as though to show Sulla's conservative and even-handed nature, the consul freed the slave as a reward, and then had him thrown from the Tarpeian rock for betraying his master. Order had to be maintained after all. Having secured the city with his legionary army, Sulla attempted to right what he saw to be the Republic's terrible problem, the tribunes, who he considered to be out of control. To that end, legislation that favoured the Senate was passed, which restored to that reverent body sole authority to enact new laws, while the power of the people's tribune was diminished. As Appian phrased it, voting would be controlled by the rich and wise, not the poor and headstrong. With the problem apparently sorted out, Sulla sent his army back to Nola and didn't interfere with the next year's elections. But his unseemly attack on Rome had scarred the consul's popularity so badly that a Marian-aligned politician, Cinna, became consul at the start of 87. Soon after, Sulla left Rome as proconsul and departed for the east, successful in his ultimate desire to win the command. He would return many years later in a much fouler mood. In our next episode on the life and times of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, we will explore the proconsul's campaigns in Anatolia against the wily and cunning Mithridates VI. This is episode 1 of our member and Patreon exclusive series on the life of Sulla. In total, our kind members and patrons got 4 episodes on this topic, from his career under Gaius Marius to becoming the absolute ruler of Rome. Their support allows us to continue creating videos and paying living wages to our team in a YouTube space where ad revenue is extremely volatile. If you want to see the rest of the series on the life of Sulla, as well as more than 200 other exclusive videos, including the ones on the Spanish War of Succession, Punic Wars, Pacific War and more, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.